My name is Grace. I'm a commercial clean energy lawyer in the team at Shoosmiths, and I'm delighted to be attending my first Renewable Day event. It's so great to be in a room with so many individuals committed to advancing the energy transition. This afternoon, I'll be discussing the practical essentials of closing the deal, from term sheets to signatures, focusing on best practices for negotiating and concluding corporate power purchase agreements, especially focusing on virtual and sleeved arrangements outside the formal tender process. So let's set the scene. My timeline here, very helpfully, is going to help me picture the scenario of a generator operating a near-side solar asset and a corporate buyer introduced via a broker or through direct contact. As the timeline unfolds, both parties agree to work towards a deal. But before diving into the formal negotiations, there are several steps we recommend to ensure a smooth journey from initial discussions to contract signing. I've been fortunate enough to sit at different sides of the table during negotiations as a private practice lawyer and whilst on secondment to a generator and a corporate buyer. So I'm going to draw on some of my best practices that I've seen at the negotiation table whilst talking to you today. So, the first one is setting some key principles that can help guide you through the process. Number one being, map out your route. Define your objectives, requirements, and strategy early on, and be clear internally before you proceed to formal negotiations. Generators are often seeking support for financing, whilst buyers are likely to be looking for price stability and sustainability credentials. Both may also include specific objectives that are specific to that project. Both parties stand to align by approaching negotiations as a collaborative partnership rather than a contest. You want to make sure responsibilities are clear, both internally, so who's negotiating your deal, and externally, who's setting the first draft and setting up the meetings. Preparation is key. You're more likely to have a successful progress in negotiations if you come prepared. Number two, communicate clear timelines. Establish and share a realistic timeframe from the outset. You might want to start with your target date for signing and work backwards. This should incorporate approval processes, seasonal considerations, and financing deadlines, providing transparency and avoiding second guessing. Number three, maintain well-documented, consistent communication. Once timelines are set, try and stick to them. Regular check-ins prevent drift and foster trust between the parties. Both sides want to know they have a reliable counterparty. Striking the balance, though, is key. Too infrequent, and the project may lose momentum. But too frequent, and the progress may be hampered. Remember, you're often laying the foundations for a relationship that could last 15 years or more. Be strategic about detail in your term sheet. The heads of term stage is an excellent chance for both parties to outline their key requirements. Whilst there is no universal template for the level of detail, agreeing as much as possible early on will streamline subsequent drafting. It also often pays to have an internal guideline of the kinds of things that you see repeatedly when negotiating. And number five, seek specialist advice at the right time. Large corporates may have in-house expertise, but others might need to engage external legal, financial, and commercial advice. Ensuring the right people are involved from the outset helps avoid surprises. That could impact the overall value of the deal. During my introductions on secondment, the first thing I was told to do was make myself known to the wider team. I went around introducing myself to everyone. This was a massive help later in negotiations because I knew exactly what everybody did and how they'd be able to help me. It's also key to know what everybody's doing on the other side too. So next up, we're back to our timeline and we're proceeding to negotiating the term sheet. Once both sides have agreed to proceed with the PPA, the heads of term phase is an invaluable opportunity to align the main commercial terms before delving into the detailed legal drafting. This stage is all about managing expectations, identifying risks, and setting the framework for the final agreement. Although typically non-binding, the term sheet often includes two binding clauses: confidentiality, so safeguards around sensitive information exchanged during negotiations, and exclusivity. This restricts either party from negotiating with others for the same supply or offtake. However, flexibility is often needed. Corporates may need to explore additional capacity and generators may have other assets in place. So carve-outs are usually included to allow discussions that will not result in a competing PPA. The other things to consider about are the issues that you might want to think about early. Negotiations should go beyond just the price and the volume. Early dialogue should cover crucial commercial and risk factors that significantly influence the viability, pricing, and structure of the deal. This might include things like availability damages. Addressing these early on prevents assumptions about the generator's reliability, creditworthiness, and guarantees or letters of credit. It's important to know about these as soon as possible. So these provisions can broaden the negotiating space if price flexibility is limited. However, you don't want to overload your heads of terms, so focus on achieving clarity without slowing the progress. This draws me to matters to leave until the PPA drafting stage. Certain topics are best addressed during contract drafting, when both parties are prepared to work through operational and legal specifics. These things might include force majeure, adding detail to your definitions, your billing and invoicing processes, your dispute resolution mechanisms, change in law provisions, and technical specifications. These clauses often reflect market norms or industry standards, and their wording may be tailored to suit a particular financial structure, asset type, or jurisdiction. The main priority is to address the most significant issues early on, for example, payment terms that are likely to be a sticking point, as you may want to find, as it's clear to have communication along this point. At this point, I should also say that it's key to think of those key principles of communication, sticking to a timeline, and ensuring the parties' expectations are clear, as it's often during these initial negotiations that things start to run away. So, back to our timeline again, and this time we're going to be looking at drafting the PPA. With heads of terms agreed, the next step is the PPA draft, where principles are converted into binding obligations. Typically, the generator provides the first draft, but regardless of who drafts it, always begin from a fair and balanced position that reflects the agreed heads of terms. Overly one-sided drafts, especially if heavily weighted towards the generator, can stall negotiations and damage trust. To facilitate this, you want to make sure you're having constructive negotiations, and we recommend scheduling collaborative meetings to walk through the draft, especially for points that have become sticking points or consecutively pushed back on during the drafting. You also want to make sure you've left sufficient time for the review and agree a process for providing feedback. This could look like track changes provided by a set date, followed by a meeting to discuss any points that are sticking, or to prepare an issues list where you can track key points that have been discussed. You want to clarify the format and the timing for the comments and responses so that everyone's clear. There's also the common bottlenecks to think of and how to avoid them. Even with a well-prepared draft, delays can arise, and this can come from stakeholder approvals, for example, board approvals or parent company sign-off, internal alignment, and that's a big one. Especially in large corporates, there are so many multiple departments that want to feed into something. This can often stall negotiation time. And finally, project financing deadlines need to be considered for generators. It's key to set and communicate clear, realistic deadlines early. If a deal must be signed at a particular date, for instance, to secure project finance or to align with a seasonal supply, raise this at the start to keep everybody aligned and to avoid last-minute surprises. This draws me on to the final additional complexities of third parties. For example, for a sleeved PPA, this involves a licensed supplier to facilitate the arrangement. Their engagement may be essential and can impact the timelines. The same goes for rooftop private wire. Often there's a landlord involved that needs to be consulted or at least aware of what's going on. And finally, virtual PPAs. The generator will need a separate route to market agreement, so it's worth on the generator side being aware of this and thinking about it in negotiations. The best practice is to engage relevant third parties early, ensure they understand the structure and the timeline, and factor this into their review and approval processes when you're planning your negotiation timetable. Which leads me to my final 5 key takeaways. Hopefully, everyone's taken that into consideration and you have 2 parties very happily signing on the dotted line. But as mentioned from the start, there are some things you can continue to think about, and it definitely helps to build a strong relationship going forwards, not just during this process. The first being to map out your route. Define your requirements and create a clear path. Number 2, communicate clear timelines. Establish a realistic time frame from the outset. Number 3, maintain well-documented, consistent communication. Communicate clearly and regularly and approach negotiation as a partnership, not a battle. Number 4, be strategic about the detail in your term sheet. Decide early on what belongs in the heads of terms and what is important to you internally and externally, but also what you can think about later. And number 5, seek specialist advice at the right time. This one's definitely key. I, from personal experience, have found jobs as a both in-house lawyer and a private practice lawyer much easier when we're consulted at the right time on a project rather than not having the full insight. So that's everything from me. I could probably keep on going about all the top tips that I can think of, but I appreciate there's a lot more to talk about today. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you all a bit later on.